Review something that we talked about on Thursday last week, which was the SOHCAHTOA thing to remember. And this meant that for triangles that were right triangles, only for right triangles, we would have sine was the opposite side over the hypotenuse. Cosine was the adjacent side over the hypotenuse, and tangent was the opposite over the adjacent, where we have sine is the opposite over hypotenuse, and cosine, C, is the adjacent over hypotenuse, tangent is opposite over adjacent. So on Thursday, all we were doing, can you guys stop talking, please? Thank you. So on Thursday, all we were doing was writing ratios based on some angle of focus, like the sine of some angle equaled some number divided by another number. Today, we're going to be writing down equations using this, but then using it to solve for one of the side lengths. And I'm going to show you that on the calculator so you can see how to do that. So, what we have first for the first example, part A, example 1A. Solve for x to the nearest hundredth. This means 2 decimal places. And since this is part A, I'm going to write just one single triangle for this. So A, C, B. Angle C is a right angle. Whoops, not 50. That's supposed to be just 5. And then this is 70 degrees. The angle of focus is the only one that they give us that's not the right angle. The angle of focus is never going to be the right angle. So I guess I'll write that down maybe in red. Angle of focus is the given angle. We can actually find this angle just by adding 90 plus 70 and then subtract from 180. That's the triangle sum theorem. But the angle of focus for us, so we don't have to do extra work, is just going to be the given angle. So that means B is our angle of focus. On this triangle, since we are given angle B, what two sides do we have out of the adjacent, opposite, and hypotenuse? So if this is the angle of focus, remember the adjacent side is between the angle of focus and the 90-degree angle. That's this. And the hypotenuse is always across. You can think of it as an arrow pointing to the hypotenuse. So this is the hypotenuse. This is the adjacent side. So which trig function would that correspond with? Raise your hand if you think you know. The only trig function that has the adjacent and hypotenuse would be cosine here. So I'm going to use cosine to make an equation. Remember, on all of these, the angle of focus goes right next to the function. It's not multiplication. It's like an input for a function. So here we can say cosine of something equals something. And we're going to see what that is in a minute. So Again, the angle of focus always goes in here. And since we have a degree measure, we're going to put the degree measure in. But then we have to come up with a fraction. So since we have cosine of some angle, that's how you say it, cosine, in this case, cosine of 70, which is this angle, that would be the adjacent angle over the hypotenuse. So we're going to write x over 5. And then we're going to solve for x. So the first step was to set up an equation. The second step was to, I guess, solve for x. That's what we're doing right now. And I'm going to solve for x by multiplying both sides by 5. So that cancels out. So I have 5 times cosine of 70 equals x. And then the third step is to make sure your calculator is in degrees. So let's see, making sure my calculator is in degrees. Can you see this? Up at the top here, it says RAD for radians. That's a different way to measure angles. But in the bottom left, it says degrees. So if I tap that, then it goes away. This is in degree mode. If I tap the radians again, it'll go to radian mode. So make sure it doesn't say RAD there. I think the iOS calculator used to say degree and then switch to radians, but I guess now it just gets rid of it. So I need to type this into my calculator and write it down to the 100th place, which is 2 decimal places. What I'm going to do is I'm going to type in 70 degrees first, and then I'm going to take the cosine of it. So that's cosine of 70, and then multiply by 5. So times 5. Did everyone else get that, whoever's trying along? So then x equals 1.71 if we go to the 100th, or yeah, the 100th place. So we now have this side. If we really wanted to, we could do a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and we could figure out the other side. Or we could use a different trig function to figure out the other side. So the last step was just to plug into the calculator. So for plug in calculator. So part B is going to look like this. Still a right triangle. Still trying to solve for x to the nearest 100th place. So on this, we are looking to solve for x. The first thing I do is look for the angle that's given, and that's 40. And then look for the two sides that I have to deal with. I'm dealing with this side, which is the opposite of this angle. And I'm dealing with this side, which is between this and this. So this is the adjacent side. So right now, I'm looking for a trig function that deals with opposite and adjacent, and that is tangent. Tangent equals opposite over adjacent. So that's how you choose which trig function. Look at the sides that you're dealing with, in this case opposite and adjacent, and then that tells you to use tangent. So we can say the tangent of the angle of focus, 40 degrees, equals the opposite side, x, over the adjacent side, 6. And then, so we've set up the equation, solve for x, so I need to multiply by 6, that cancels. I get x equals 6 times the tangent of 40. That's how you read that. Make sure your calculator is in degree mode. So that's radians. This is degree mode. And then I'm going to do 40 and then hit the tangent button. So 40, hit the tangent button, and then times 6. They used to do it with just tables. Like they just have a bunch of values for angles. Like if this was 40 degrees, they'd have a list of all sine, cosine, tangent values for it. Just crazy decimals. And then 41, 42, 43, just a giant table. So this is 5.03, and we don't round up at all. So we have the same instructions. Something a tiny bit different happens here, though. Tiny bit. Yeah, I forgot to write this. So 50 degrees for angle B. So on this, you first try to set up an equation. Maybe I'll write SOHCAHTOA so that you can remember what trig functions are for what sides.
That sounds like one of Maui's mystical Samoan spells.
And we have the angle of focus, 50 degrees. We have the adjacent and the hypotenuse. Adjacent and hypotenuse is cosine. So I'm going to write cosine of 50 degrees equals the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Most people got that right. But when you solve, x is in the bottom. So to get x in the top, this is the long way to do it. You multiply by x on both sides. And so we get x times cosine of 50 degrees equals 2. And then to get x by itself, we divide by this thing. Remember, if we plug this into the calculator, it's still just a number, but it's like a nasty decimal number. But we can still divide by it. So to get x by itself, we divide by cosine of 50 degrees. Don't worry. And then x equals 2 divided by cosine of 50 degrees. And I'll show you how to type this into the calculator. You know what? It might be easier. We're rounding to the hundredth place, right? Might be easier for some people if we change this cosine of 50 into a number. So I'm going to do that. Make sure I'm in degrees. 50 cosine. So really, if you really want to, you can change it into a number. X equals 2 divided by 0.6427, I'll say 9. We're only going to round to this, so I don't have to write everything. But I don't want to round to this right away because I want some extra accuracy. And then I just do 2 divided by that. 2 divided by 0.64279. So x equals a band called 311. 3.11. Here's how I would do it on my calculator, just all in one step from here. So if I had 2 divided by cosine of 50, you could also do this. 2 divided by, and then parentheses. Parentheses, 50 cosine, close parentheses, equals. And it gives you the same thing. I'll do that one more time. So you're basically just putting parentheses around this when you type it into the calculator. So you can do it all in one without writing this number down. So 2 divided by parentheses and then do cosine of 50 by typing 50 cosine, close the parentheses, and then equals, and then you get the same thing. All right, so the shortcut. Notice the original, which was cosine of 50 equals 2 over x. That was the original, right? That changed to this, right? Do we see that? These just switch places. If x is on the bottom, you just switch places. And then just type it into the calculator. If x is in the bottom, switch the x and the bottom. Or sorry, switch the left side with the bottom there. That's what happens. These are all the steps to do that, but that'll happen every time. If you're trying to solve x, solve for x and x is in the bottom. That'll happen. So that's the shortcut, and then you can type that into the calculator really quickly. All right, last example, part D, and we're going to have thank you. So you can use a shortcut on this one. That's a hint. But I'll let you try that first. So on this problem, we have the angle of focus, which is given, is the given angle. That would be 25. And the sides that we're dealing with are the opposite, because it's farthest away, and the hypotenuse. So opposite and hypotenuse, that would be sine. So we're going to use sine of 25 degrees equals the opposite, 2, over the hypotenuse, x. And then we're going to use this shortcut. Anytime we have x on the bottom, we're just going to switch those two. So then I'd have x equals 2 over sine of 25 degrees. And I'll show you once more how to plug it into your calculator all at once. That would be 2 divided by parentheses 25 sine, close parentheses, equals. And you get 4.73. So x equals 4.73. And that's it.